there's a lot more freedom to work with people. Some of the things I found, just kind of general working there, what's worked well for us in working with people on Skid Row is the whole relational aspect. I think that's a real key piece. You can throw a lot of dollars and you can throw a lot of programs for people, but I think about clients that I've worked with over the years and the clients that our staff have worked with, the folks that have been able to transition and move from streets to home, from homelessness to streets to housing and permanent housing, are folks who really had good relationships either within their own network or with a case manager or a counselor. They're the folks who got that support. Our case managers do a lot of hand-holding sometimes. They go to make sure our case managers, they go to appointments with people, they travel the bus with people, they go to immigration appointments, and a lot of our clients just need someone with them. Because a lot of our folks are very much alone in what they do and just socially and where they're at, and either they just grew up alone or just the choices they made have kind of made them alone, kind of shied them away from people. And so it's been really key, I think, for our staff when working with people is to build those relationships and to understand people on more than just an intake sheet. Okay, I know how old you are, I know your mental illness diagnosis, I know that you have a drug problem, I know that you're taking this medication, but try to understand people below that level, kind of the reasons why people are doing the things that they're doing. And so that's, I think, yeah, like it comes back to the basics of just being relational with people and working with people, calling people out. Like I think when you have that relationship and you have that trust, our counselors are able to work with people to be like, hey, we noticed we're trying to work on your budgeting here. You spent $300 last week eating out. Let's kind of talk about your budget because this is not going to work, and kind of challenging people. But that's only kind of built after you've been able to build some trust with them. So I think that's one of the key aspects of working down here has been building trust and not moving away from the Band-Aid approach. Well, we'll just throw more food at it. Okay, if we just feed Skid Row, as many people will just eat their way out of homelessness. And that's one of the hard things is, folks who want to help. I think there's a desire to help folks down in Skid Row. And a lot of churches or a lot of just groups want to come down. I did it in college and university. We used to come down here with a big pot of spaghetti, and we were God's hand in Skid Row, passing out spaghetti. And I think that's a start. I think giving out charity is definitely, I think, needed at times because people need basic needs. I think looking at the Bible and Jesus feeding the 5,000, charity is needed. I think there are people who are hungry and need things. However, I think we can't just end at charity. I think a lot of places see the charity and think, okay, that's great. I did my good deed for the day, and I brought Jesus to this person via my spaghetti. And the spaghetti is going to change their life. I think charity is good, but it's not the end all. I think as believers and as social service providers, we have to look at things beyond the charity and look at change. As I was mentioning before, what our agency is trying to do is, it's hard being a shelter agency and tell people, my goal is to get us away from shelter, is to move us into more permanent solutions. Shelter has been good for many years, but our agency is moving into this aspect of let's look into systemic change. Let's look at the reasons why people are homelessness. Let's address those reasons. Let's keep people, I think the conferences have done a good job at this. We do a lot of eviction prevention to help people from coming down here. Let's work on people, on their finances. Let's give them the support they need so they don't end up down here. Rather than, okay, they'll become homeless, and now let's figure out how to get you back into housing. Let's kind of be more proactive about it. So our agency, we're trying to move into the affordable housing realm and kind of move us into one of the main reasons why our folks are homeless sometimes is just the lack of access to housing. They don't have the money or the resources to get into some place stable that they can be. So our agency, instead of trying to find housing for people, we're still doing that, but we're moving to the stage of let's build it. If no one else is going to do it, let's use some of our money, let's use some of our endowment to help build and support an affordable housing program. So we have places to move people. I think that's what we're doing with our family shelter program right now. Us, and I believe the Union Rescue Mission are kind of the last strongholds of holding a family shelter program in Skid Row. Our goal has been to kind of move our families out, just because this isn't a family. Skid Row isn't an area that's conducive to families. There's no schools, 9th Street, but that's kind of out right now. There's no parks. It's just the things that kids need just to grow up and be in a community and have that sense of community with other kids is kind of lacking in this area. Some people say, well, we should convert the area to make it more family friendly. Some people say, no, we'll just keep them out. I think for where Skid Row and downtown is at right now, we feel our agency wants to move the program to a more suitable area for families, just a more normalized area. And so I think that's an aspect of systemic change we're looking at, is the housing piece. Another piece that we're trying to move into is the whole aspect of social justice and social enterprise. And you know, a lot of our guys, and I say guys, but it's guys and girls, women, just lack jobs. And they lack either one, the skills, because if you've been on the streets for many, many years, you know, you don't have a stellar resume, there's large gaps, or you know, you may have had a skill, but then it's, you know, a lot of our folks were tradesmen, or they worked in like machinists, or they had a very specific field, and now that field is no longer exists. Where did they go? Our agencies are trying to look into developing a social enterprise, getting people jobs. You know, if you can have a job training program, which is great, but if you train people, but you have nowhere to send them, you've just created someone with skills but with no real place to transition into. So we're trying to create jobs. Like, how do we do a job training program that's linked to a job, that when someone ends our job training program, they're actually going to go to something that's going to have money, that's going to be able to sustain them, kind of to help people sustain themselves, get them jobs, get them educated. For those who can, because there is a portion of folks who can't, whether it be a disability, mental or physical, they may not be able to work. For those folks who can, who are able to work and have the desire, we want to create something like that. So this whole aspect of change versus charity, I think, is very important. For us being on Skid Row, for our agency, and even for me, I think it's a huge issue. You know, I think one of the reasons why people burn out is down here is there's a lot of charity sometimes, but charity only does so much. With charity, you see the same person come back time after time after time after time. Change is, my goal is to not see you again. My goal is to get you from here to housing. And then you come back now and then to tell me how great things are. It's not to see you come back so many times. And I think that's the hard part, is as service providers, it's sometimes hard to see people who make bad choices over and over again and keep coming back to you. I think that can be, I know for me, it's tough to see. It's a hard job working in Skid Row. It's a real tough, draining, because you're working with people who have fallen through all the safety nets, basically, that LA has to provide. And once you've fallen through all the safety nets, you kind of end up down here in Skid Row. So you have multiple barriers, you have multiple hurdles that you have to go through. And so it can be very challenging working with folks, because you want so much for them, and you don't want to just do the charity. You want to kind of get them to be where they can be self-sufficient and kind of be able to take care of themselves. Our goal is not to make people dependent on us. I think that's a key thing. Whenever we were doing something, our goal can't be that they need to depend on us. I think we can be a support, but ultimately our goal is to get people to not always have to depend on me, or have to keep coming back to me each week to ask me the same thing over again, or I need help with this, or our goal is to give support so they can move on to what their next phase of life, wherever that may be. So it can be very tricky, I think, at times, working with folks and seeing some of the cycles that people have gone through. People go through a lot of different cycles. People are homeless for a variety of reasons. It's housing, it could be mental illness, it could be drugs, it could be a combination of those, any of those. It could be bad finances. I remember one of my very first clients actually was a lawyer who was in the bar, either Utah or Colorado. He was taking care of his brother who was mentally limited. and they made some really bad financial decisions and lost all their money, and they had nowhere to go. And so they basically bought a train ticket to LA because they heard LA was the place that had homeless services. I think it was Colorado. They were in Colorado because there wasn't too much services out there. So they just bought it with the money they had, and they ended up here at Union Station. They walked over to our shelter and asked if there was anything that we could do. And that was my very first client. It was a lawyer. It was not your traditional like Skid Row client. You think of the guy on the street who's done drugs for many years, or the typical kind of crazy guy on Skid Row. It was this very articulate lawyer who just a string of bad luck and horrible financial decisions just ultimately ended up down here, and he had nowhere to go. And he was taking care of his brother, and they had no other support structures. So I think we work with a variety of people. You have those folks, and then you have the folks who've been here for years and years and years, who are chronically homeless, who've lived on the streets, who've gotten used to living on the streets. It's just a wide variety of folks that have been down here. And we have a lot of students who come to our shelter, and I always tell them, education's great, and education is amazing, and it'll give you access to things of getting out of poverty. But education doesn't always guarantee a free life or an easy life, even sometimes a job. Life throws a lot of curveballs, and our guys on Skid Row and our women have seen a lot of curveballs in their lives. Either one, they put themselves in a situation where they got a bad curveball, or just things happened. Another client I had was a guy who's working on his PhD in physics. He already had his master's, and his wife died tragically. I think it was a car accident, and he just had a mental breakdown. This guy was the nerdiest of nerdy guys. Like, he looked like Urkel. He was like, if you had a picture of white Urkel, it was him. And he was just a great guy, wore a pocket protector, but he was living on Skid Row because he had this mental break. He came to our shelter, and we extended him. We were like, this guy, we'll want to work with him. He eventually got a job. We talked to Caltech about him teaching there, and they were open because he had his master's degree and to come back and kind of finish up some of his studies, but he didn't want to go back to the field of physics because it reminded him of his wife, and it was just too traumatic for him. And so he ended up just being, he got a security guard job, and he's stable now. He has his own place. I think he's still a security guard. But he's stable, he's seeing a therapist, and things are kind of okay for him. So there's a whole wide reasons why folks aren't down here. This guy was doing well, he was married, had a great stable life, I guess you can say, and then just tragedy happens, and then he ended up down here. So that's what a lot of our workers work on, is trying to work with people, because there's a whole different wide variety of reasons why folks are homeless, and it's kind of challenging and kind of working with people in their situation and not treating people like a number, because I think that's hard. I think our folks get passed around here a lot down here at Skid Row, and that's one of the frustrating things to see is, I can see it from a social service provider point of view, because you have hundreds of people and you got to get so much done. People get treated almost like they're a number, and it's really hard. Our folks just want to be heard sometimes. I think a lot of people don't hear them out. I think it's just, they're used to people giving them, saying, okay, you got to do this, you got to go here to this office, take this referral, and then you'll be done, move on. But really taking time out to listen to our clients and to go with them is really, really important. One of my interns, we have MSW interns, like I was years ago. He said one of the most powerful pieces that he ever witnessed in Skid Row was he was working with a Vietnamese man who was severely mentally ill and was trying to get him on his benefits to get him cleared up and then get him on GR. And he first had to clear up some things at immigration, and he had to go to the GR office, and so he spent the entire day going with him. And he's like, wow, first he went to the GR office, the welfare office, and they mistook this guy for another Vietnamese guy because they thought it was the same. Like, oh, Vietnamese name, okay, it's him. And he kept saying, this is not me, this is not me. And it took like a couple hours before the office actually said, oh no, sorry, we made a mistake. It was actually a different Vietnamese guy, man. And the social worker intern was just like, oh my gosh, this is